I'm Karen Burrows. I'm the Managing Director of Madeira UK. And it's a real pleasure to see, or not see you, but to present this webinar to you. Normally we'd have been in flesh, but obviously with the COVID situation, we're all sitting comfortably somewhere else, whether we're in our workplace or at home, working from home, instead of at Printwear and Promotion or wherever we may have been on this day in March. So I'm really happy that we've been able to put something together for you, and hopefully we'll give you an overview of some of our product ranges and also some hints and tips about how best to get the best out of your embroidery. So there's me, I'm Karen. I've worked at Madeira. I don't say how many years I've worked there, but more than 30 years, perhaps since some of you weren't even born. So I've picked up quite a few things over the years. About embroidery and about best practices in business and working with your embroidery machine and getting the right products for your embroidery machines. I also look after the northern countries in Europe, so I'm sales director for Northern Europe, and I visit other countries and pick up some hints and tips of what they do over there as well, which is sometimes a bit different, but they're still intrinsically running an embroidery machine, and I can pick one out by sound from wherever I happen to be. It's a very familiar sound to me nowadays. We started running courses and seminars because Madeira, when we sell the thread, people were calling us to say, your thread's breaking. And we basically said, if you're using Madeira thread, your thread should not be breaking. Let's see how we can help you to prevent that happening. So a lot of these things that we're talking about over the course of the next hour or so will cover some of those aspects, but obviously we cannot confine it, or we cannot put everything into 1.5 hours. That would really be a course of 2 days perhaps. So we'll do the best we can. Okay, so as I'm looking at the screen now, I can see Jane, Julia and Andrew. Jane Barlow is the sales executive that covers the south of England, and Jane's been with us for many years also, and she's going to cover the needles section of the webinar. Andrew is our head of sales. Andrew looks after the north of England and Scotland and Ireland, and he's going to be covering the backing section. And Julia Redfern is the sales exec that covers the Midlands, and she's going to be covering underthread. Now, all of these items, all of these sections are absolutely critical for your embroidery. So if we go on to the first slides, please, Jane.
Let me just go back on to share.
And Jane's in charge of sharing the screen, so I hope you can all share the screen. You want to go on to slideshow, Jane, not the...
Set from the beginning, resume. That's it.
Okay, super. Okay, so we can see this. So we've been through that one, so we'll go to the next one. So in case you can't see us, those are our pictures. So we quickly go over those. Choices. My section is about threads. And it seems that I have got the bigger section because we've got a very wide choice of threads. So if you can go to the next one. Looking at your colour cards, if I was face to face, obviously I'd be holding up these colour cards, but clearly we're trying to do this remotely. So you may only look at the colour card of the product that you use, which is either going to be the classic or the polyneon, or both maybe. Some of you may have the other threads, which are the frosted matte, the metallics, 2 types of metallic colour cards that we have, Burmilana wool and Firefighter for fire retardancy. We're not going to talk in massive detail about all these products. We're going to focus more on the next slide, which is to do with the classic or the polyneon. Now, most companies will use as their standard thread a rayon or a polyester thread. You may not know what it is that you're using. You might just think it's the thread color or the color number, but it will be either rayon or polyester. Rayon is a natural product. It comes from trees, it comes from environmentally friendly environments. It has a very high sheen and it feels a lot less plastic than a polyester thread. Both the threads are washable to 95 degrees. So whether you're using polyester or viscose, they're both washable to 95 degrees. The difference is, and it will seem as though I'm emphasizing the viscose, the classic, and I am to an extent. The reason being that it is more, it's kinder to your machine and it's softer than a polyester thread. However, even though it is easy to cut and it is a clean break, and if you have any threads in front of you, it might be worth just picking up a spool of thread and trying to snap it. So if you snap it in your hands, whether you've got a viscose or a polyester, you'll find the viscose snaps quite easily and the polyester does stretch a little bit more before it snaps. Now this sounds as though if you have something that snaps easily, that's not very good. But it means that if it snaps easier, if you have a fault on your machine and the thread should break, then it will break straight away. So if it's a design fault or a machine fault, needle fault, etc., the thread will break instead of continuing to stitch. So if you have a polyester, particularly cheap polyesters, they can continue to stitch even when they should have stopped. And that can cause needle deflection and sometimes breaks on the needle. So even though we sell millions of combs of both polyester and viscose worldwide all the time, just be aware that sometimes polyester thread may cause a slight problem when you're embroidering. However, we do recommend it for chef's whites, for anything that's going to be laundered at high temperatures consistently. So if you've got rugby kits and things like this, it's a good idea to actually have a stronger thread that will withstand all these washing at high temperatures. Okay. Looking at both the classic and the polyneon, in the rayon, which is viscose rayon, classic has 422 colours and the 40 weight of the corresponding polyester polyneon has 433 colours. We've got 60s weights, 30 weights and 12 weights in the viscose. Why do we have those different weights? Well, I'll explain a little bit more about that as we go through the slides. But just as a rule of thumb, if you look at the numbers, it is the lower the number, the thicker the thread. So if it's a 12 weight, it's thicker than a 40s weight. If it's a 75 weight or a 60 weight, it is finer than the standard 40s weight. And 40s weight thread is the thread that is used universally as a standard thread, and everything is digitized for a 40s weight thread unless you tell your digitizer otherwise. Okay. If you've got your colour card in front of you, you'll be able to look at it now. If not, just follow these guidelines here on the screen. On the polyester colour card, you will see at the top, you will see the unit size and the product code. So even if you're in a different country, the product code itself, which is Article 919, will be written within that product code. Sometimes, like in the UK, we have NI in front of it. In other countries, there could be something else in front of it. But the 919 or 918, which is the size of the 5,000 meter cone, the product code for the 5,000 meter cone is 918, and the 1,000 meter mini snap spool is 919. You will see that on your colour card. You will also see the thread thickness. So again, you can see the 75s, the 60s, the 40s, and even on this particular one, you will see there's a polyneon FR. So if you look inside your colour card, there's a colour, a dot corresponding to the weights that are available. So the blue dot will correspond to the polyneon 60, the yellow dot will correspond to the polyneon 75, and the polyneon FR, the availability of the colours, will be designated inside your colour card by a red dot. Okay. every colour is available in the Polyneon 60. We also talk about the recommended needle size for the thread thickness. Now that recommended needle size is for standard weight fabrics only. If you have a particularly fine fabric, or you have a very thick fabric like a judo belt, then you may have to go higher or to a special size needle. These are just recommended needle sizes for standard weight fabrics using that particular size of thread. And we do actually recommend that you change the needle according to the thread, which Jane will go into a little bit more in detail later on. Okay. The other thing that's on your colour card is the Ergotex certification number. I'm going to mention about Ergotex later, but you will see the actual certification number that is there, which is valid for that colour card and those products that are seen on that particular colour card. And then the other thing that's on there is your washing and your care instructions. And you can see again, these threads are washable to 95 degrees, and it tells you about all of the care instructions. Okay. Also in your colour card, you will see the Pantone references. You will see the Pantone references that show you the Pantone number that you're searching for in numerical order and the corresponding number of your polyester thread. You will see that polyester thread also having its own column. So if, for example, you're looking for Pantone reference 172C and you find that in the numerical sequence on your colour card, you will find that that's available in column, can't see it on that one, but you will see that it's available in the right column. And that column will you be able to find on your colour card because the column numbers are written on your colour card. Okay, Jane, I think you've gone back.
Yeah, I'm just going back to circle fresh.
Okay. Just go back. I'm not in charge of the clicker, so it's very difficult to try to keep up with this, but I hope Jane's keeping up with my talk. Okay, so I mentioned the Ergotex certificate. So the Ergotex certificate on the left-hand side, as I'm looking at it, shows you the number, as I mentioned before. You need to check when you see numbers on a certificate that it is legitimate, because there are some unscrupulous companies that quote that they have Ergotex certification and actually it's not valid, it's either out of date or potentially they are just using the Ergotex logo and it actually doesn't have the correct certification. The other thing about the Ergotex certificate nowadays is for Madeira, it is covering the viscose and the polyester range, because we have class 1, which is the highest standard for Ergotex certification, and class 1 is suitable even for baby wear, so it's suitable for all your applications. So quality continuity for Madeira is absolutely guaranteed, not just with the Ergotex certificate. We have the technical data sheets that you can take if your customer is looking for a technical data sheet, and also the quality management system, which is the ISO 9001. And that is very, very important. We have that here in the UK for Madeira UK, and we also have it in Madeira Germany for all our processes. Another question that we're asked at Madeira is about sustainability. There is news to follow that we can't actually discuss today about some more exciting news from Madeira, but whether we have this exciting news or not, we have something that we've always followed as our ethos about recycling, about our footprint, and about the life cycle of our products. With recycling internally within the production processes, we have recycling of energy and water, and externally, maybe you do or don't know, but you can recycle the inners of your Madeira thread. So once you've used the thread, the cone itself can be put into your local recycling facility. The footprint for Madeira, we make sure that we minimize the carbon footprint and we only use green processes and green products from sustainable sources wherever possible. And with the life cycle aspect of it, the durability of our products stands the life cycle, but also, again, the processes and the production processes that we use, we ensure the life cycle is very clean and very green wherever we can. And hence, our products are recommended to use on machine brands globally, wherever you are and whichever machine brand you happen to have, with all of these brands here and probably many others besides. Okay. And then we look at a tip that we have talking about thread breaks. Now, before we talk about, when I spoke about the thread, there are different weights of thread, and we have to think about the weights of the thread as well as whether you're going to use a viscose or a polyester thread. We've looked at the snapping of the viscose against the polyester, but we also have to look at the thickness and the weights of the thread. We look at the texture of your fabric, we look at the type of embroidery that you're doing, and we look at the care instructions. When we do our seminars face-to-face, we actually do hands-on experiments about all of this and show you in detail as to what you should be using and why. This is just a general overview that we're going to go into as to how you can prevent some of the thread breaks and the difficulties that you may encounter. Okay, so if we look at thread breaks in general, one of the most critical factors, and something you may not even consider, is how your thread is stored. Now, last night, it was freezing. When you walk in, you're going to have felt cold unless your heating system has kicked in. And the thread is also going to get cold. It can also get very hot. So try and make sure that before you use your thread, that it's brought up to a standard room temperature, which isn't too hot and it isn't too cold. And when you're storing your thread, keep it in its box or buy a box, plastic boxes to look after it. Try not to leave your thread standing on the shelf, gathering dust and susceptible to the elements. If it's in bright lights, it can lose its sheen, or the lubrication can dry out. So try to avoid cold and damp and humidity and direct sunshine. And also think about the fact that it can absorb moisture, so you don't want it to become dry. You don't want it to become damp or to dry out. Okay. Now, again, thinking about thread breaks and thinking about which thread you should be using. We used to have to alter a design to suit the thread itself because there was only a 40s weight thread available. You can use small lettering and get very, very fine details if you use finer thread. Okay, you can use screen printing, and fine details can be achieved with screen printing, but embroidery has a longer lasting life, and also it adds quite a lot of value to a garment or an item. And if you use the right needles and the fine threads, you can get excellent results. And looking at the options for the fine threads, we've mentioned on your colour card, we have the Polyneon 60. On the viscose colour card, you have the classic 60, and you also have the frosted matte, which gives great clarity. We even have a Polyneon 75 now, which is very, very fine, and you use an extremely fine needle. So you can see even the smallest detail you can achieve with a fine thread. And if we go on to the next slide. You can see here, we're recommending to use a finer thread wherever possible, classic 40 if you can't, because it's a more flexible thread. And bear in mind that every time you're making a stitch, it's taking 6 or 7 needle movements to create that stitch. So every time the needle's moving backwards and forwards and the thread is going through, you're going to potentially cause damage on your fabric, which is why, not just for clarity, we recommend using a fine thread and a fine needle to create the fine stitching. You just click on here. So with a 40s weight thread, you can get down to 6 to 7 millimeter stitching, 3 millimeters with a 60 weight thread, and you can even go down to a finer thickness, a finer size of text using a 75 weight needle. Bear in mind that when you're creating small text, you have to try to digitize accordingly, because you're either going to add a few stitches or have some more space if you don't want your design to be too spaced out. So make sure that unnecessary stitches are removed, but you haven't got too many gaps if you're using a fine thread. And if you're embroidering onto a polo shirt, think about the foundation of your details by creating some background fill stitch to give you a better base to stitch onto. And sometimes you can use a tone-on-tone thread to create that design. Sometimes you can use a water-soluble topping, but Andrew's going to talk about that more in his section. Okay. So if you want something a little bit more special, talked about the classic and the viscose threads, and also the polyneon polyester threads. You can go a long way by mixing threads. You can mix threads in the same design, or you can create a design using a single type of thread, but something a little bit different. You can go thicker, you can go finer, you can go textured, metallics. You can use a fire retardant thread, obviously, if you've got workwear, because that is really critical on certain workwear. You can glow in the dark if you have a lunar thread. You can have reflective thread, and we've even got conductive threads nowadays. But these are whole different seminars which we're going to develop over the course of the next few months. So there's lots of threads to choose from. I've tried to identify them very briefly in a very short space of time.